Hi guys, so today clearly I'm not in my room. Today I wanted to make this sort of a genuine and authentic video. I'm not gonna be talking about crazy little topic about Japan today. I just want to sort of talk from the heart and lay everything out about myself. Today's a little bit different, so I wanted to be outside for this. Yes, I'm a little bit shy, like I said again, but I'm trying to conquer my fears of filming outside in public. I'm at a local park right now in Tokyo near my house. It is pretty quiet, but if you do hear like construction noises or dogs barking or anything like that, you can literally see people walking behind you, but that's just literally because I'm outside. So if this is your first time seeing me, hi, my name is Emmy. I was born and raised in Tokyo, Japan, and on this channel, I try to bring the authentic side of Japan from a unique native perspective. So before I get into the nitty-gritty of this video, I just want to first off thank you guys so much for helping me reach 1,000 subscribers. It honestly means the world to me. I didn't think that, I always wanted to be a YouTuber ever since I was a little girl, but just like never sort of knew like what videos I would post. Like obviously I was inspired by like Bethany Moda back in the days when she was like the face of YouTube pretty much, but I just never knew what sort of videos to post. And I guess I had an epiphany recently and I posted this video on why I was planning on moving back to Tokyo, and it garnered quite a bit of attention. So ever since then I started making it like a consistent thing to post on here regularly, maybe like 2 months ago, and I am so happy to see all the engagement. I read most of the comments. Yeah, so far I have been just talking about things that don't really get a lot of attention on social media or in the media in general. Obviously Japan is super glorified on social media. People obviously don't talk about the aspects that are hidden under the surface, so that's sort of my intention of talking and sitting down in front of a camera and talking about some of the topics that might be overlooked. So that's sort of my intention on this channel. Before I get into this video as well, I just want to sort of preface by saying that everything that I'm going to be talking about is purely my own experiences. I share my experiences so that maybe it can reach someone who may be feeling the same things or have felt the same feelings before. If there's some certain conceptions about life or ways of living that I have that people may not agree to or you might not agree to, just know that, I have grown up very differently from the typical Japanese person living here. So please have respect for everyone else's experiences as well as my own. And that being said, let's get into this video. So like I mentioned previously, while I was still living in Toronto, sort of slowly preparing for a move back to Japan and have decided on my move back to Japan, I was like, okay, like let me make a video on like why I'm deciding to move back to Tokyo, just cause, I sort of have these little epiphanies every now so often, like, oh, like I would want to make a video out of this. So that's pretty much what happened. And I sort of realized like there's a lot of people that are actually interested about, aspects about living in Japan and stuff like that. Coming from me, I feel like I can provide a very unique perspective on things because not only have I grown up here all my life, but I also grew up very differently to like the traditional Japanese person. I'm very much westernized, but not in the fact that like people would expect. It's not like I grew up in America or I grew up overseas. I literally grew up in Tokyo. So sort of the thought process behind my move back to Tokyo and weighing the pros and cons. At that time, I did a lot of thinking, and at that time and at that moment, it felt like the right decision to move back. Spending the last 3.5, 4 years in a country where you basically made your second home, it sort of becomes natural to want to be able to stay there and live there after your studies. That's sort of the case with most international students. I guess living in Toronto for 4 years, I have seen how drastically it has changed. Like cost of living has gone up, and I talked about this all in my first video where you can definitely like see, I'm probably repeating some points, but that's sort of like where I stood my ground. Like something in my gut was telling me that, I love Toronto in terms of like the people that I've made friends with and the experiences that I've been fortunate enough to have in Toronto, but something in my gut was telling me like it's time to move on. It's time for newer experiences and to venture out into something else. I'm not gonna lie guys, living in Toronto is super expensive. I do understand that Japan's wages are extremely low, salaries are significantly lower, yen is a lot weaker than most currencies out there, but I had to outweigh the pros and cons of in terms of the standard of living in Tokyo, I felt like at that moment I could reap a lot of accessibility and benefits that Toronto's not providing for me. In that moment, I definitely valued standard of living way more than I guess what was in my bank account. Seeing all these videos on, people traveling to Japan, it just felt like a waste of a privilege to not move back to Japan at that moment, because how lucky am I to be able to call this city my home, this city that, I'm so proud to say that I fortunately was able to grow up in. After I made that video, I kind of like veered off of YouTube for a bit, but ever since I returned to Japan, that's when I started making videos. And I returned to Tokyo, I believe September 15th. I was very busy when I just came back, just because I had 2 friends from Toronto visiting and I was showing them around, and it was a lot of fun. So I was pretty busy. I wasn't really transitioning to regular life at that moment. However, after they left, I was unemployed, and that was mainly because that was my original plan. Actually, no, my original plan was to work at this company that I interned for back in Canada. And I did have some interviews with that company because they had an office in Tokyo. I did the interviews. However, I ultimately ended up not getting the job just because basically the job required native professional level Japanese, in which, especially at that time of the interview, I was in Toronto, I was not using Japanese at all. So every time I spoke, I choked so bad. And obviously, like, my Japanese is not up to par with my English. Ironically, yes. And I'll get into that in a bit, but I didn't get the job. And so I loved that company and I wanted to work there, but things didn't work out. So I ultimately was like, okay, let me just take a break, be able to reflect on things, use this time to reflect, because I feel like when you're living in a fast-paced city your whole life, you're so used to being on the go that you don't really take the time to like just sit down and think and reflect and like manifest sort of the life that you want to live. So that was sort of my intention, right? Coming back home, and I wanted to like travel while I had the time, because I sort of see like this life as like, or working a 9 to 5 as this capitalistic like rat race, like you're on a hamster wheel and you can't get off. So before I get onto that wheel or face the reality of being an adult, I wanted to sort of take that time to relax. So that was sort of my intention with it. But then after my friends left Japan, I became really like, when you have so much free time in your hands, it's really hard to be disciplined and make sort of a strict schedule with yourself. Ultimately, I got really bored. I was like, okay, let me just like at least find a part-time job to sort of move the time faster and sort of at least be able to provide for myself. I applied to a well-renowned brand. Let's just say that I'm able to speak English to customers all day in that job. So that's predominantly why I chose the brand and I got the job. My intention with working at that brand was that I didn't want to put myself into a environment where it was predominantly Japanese. Obviously, if I put myself in that sort of environment, it's a big jump from being used to foreign work environments and then jumping straight into a typical Japanese environment where Japanese customs are strictly held, like using keigo, the senpai kohai structure, and all of this. Like I had never worked a job in Japan up till this point in my life. So if I'm going to start working in Japan, especially after being in a multicultural environment my entire life, pretty much, like I needed to make sure that it was somewhere where I could sort of dip my feet in the water. And that's what I was telling myself, right? That was the plan that I had. Returning home has definitely felt both familiar and foreign at the same time. After making another place your second home and getting used to everything and coming back, it just feels foreign at the same time. Everyone moved on without you. That's sort of like where it is right now. But going back to what I was saying about like, my Japanese not being up to par with my English, basically fast forward, I went to an international school from kindergarten up until high school. So I spoke English literally my entire life, ever since I was a little baby. So not only am I surrounded by teachers who are of white descent, now that I think about it, most of my teachers growing up were white. Like in my high school, like my academic system was the AP system, so it was literally American. Like I took the SATs, I took AP classes, I did all of that. So obviously when you're taking the SAT, you're preparing yourself to apply to, foreign universities. So that's pretty much like the structure of an international school. My personality from the get-go, if you compare it to a typical Japanese person who has grown up here, we're two different people, babe. Like that's why I really loved moving to Toronto, because I didn't feel like I had to assimilate to any sort of culture. I fit right in and I found my people. Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is that I developed a very westernized personality even though I grew up in Tokyo. That's like sort of really the funny thing. And if you do meet people who went to an international school in Asia, I feel like they have sort of the same situation as me. And it's important to open your perspective on the fact that a lot of Asian folks like have gone to an international school. I think think when people are so shocked by the fact that, I have no accent or I speak English very well, it's the fact that like they're not aware of the fact that international schools are a thing. So I kind of have to explain that over and over to people that I just meet. So a lot of people ask me why I chose to move to Toronto, sort of the reasons behind it. So I'm gonna explain sort of the why and the lessons that I learned. But before I get into that, I want to sort of explain my motivations for studying abroad in the first place. So it came to my understanding that Japanese universities, like their education is completely useless. Everyone I know that has went to a Japanese university did not study. I don't necessarily want to like hate on Japanese education, but that's sort of like the basic conception of Japanese education. And obviously like I felt like my English abilities were not being put to use if I had stayed in a Japanese environment. I feel like my growth would hinder if I stayed in Japan. Ultimately, I wanted to go move to a country where English was the predominant language. So initially, I glorified America as anyone would, but thinking about it, reflecting on it, my counselor and I were in talks, ongoing conversations about, potential countries that I could study in. He actually advised me not to study in America just because they rarely give out grants to international students. You also can't work as an international student unless it's on campus. So that limits your opportunities heavily. And obviously, even if you wanted to live in America after graduating, chances of that happening are very, very slim. Like it's very, very hard and a lengthy process, whereas study in Canada is actually a lot easier to be able to live there after you graduate. So it came down to Australia, UK, and Canada. And I don't know, Canada just kept popping up as like, really great place to study in, blah, blah, blah. So I narrowed it down to Canada, ultimately ended up with University of Toronto. That was sort of my motivation to move abroad. I felt like, as a person and as an individual, I really am about, putting myself in uncomfortable situations to be able to grow. I hate the feeling of being stagnant and just being like this. So that's sort of like why I decided to leave. And I'm so glad I did because I grew up being really spoiled and bratty. I feel like if I stayed in Japan, I would not grow to the person that I am today. I had to learn everything on my own when I moved, like opening up a SIM card, a bank account, doing my own laundry, like doing everything by myself, like cooking, like everything. Like it sort of instilled in me like a great responsibility to take care of myself, and I had never done that up until that point. So like leaving a home and like living alone, let alone in a world that's like 16 hours away by plane, it had a lot of ups and downs, but I'm so glad that I did that for myself. One really, really great thing about living in Toronto and what I realized is that like I have grown to become a lot stronger in terms of like being able to stand up for myself and stand my ground when needed. So what I mean by that is like when I would get unwanted, like honestly verbal and sexual harassment from men in Japan on the streets, I used to freeze up. I feel like I couldn't defend for myself, stand up for myself in those situations. And I feel like being in Toronto has helped me blossom into this person that can actually like, yell at you or cuss at you. Well, when needed, when necessary. If I sense that I feel like I'm in a toxic work environment, I am not afraid to sort of speak up about what I'm experiencing and that, I want to leave. This is not okay. That is something that I am really, truly grateful for during my time in Canada. Growing up in Japan, they sort of build you into this person, into like, don't make a scene. They don't want you to speak up. And it's so embedded into the culture, and that's why everyone just sucks it up and doesn't talk and like sucks their higher ups ass, and it's just like no one has a voice for themselves. And babe, that is not who I am, and that is not who I'm trying to be, regardless of whether I'm living in Japan. Like when I was complaining about these things, my friend was like, しょうがないよ、もう日本に住んでるんだから, like can't really do anything about it. Like you live in Japan now, like you kind of have to like live with the fact that you have to adjust. And I'm like, honestly, I don't like that mindset. I genuinely do not fuck with that. But definitely my time in Toronto has helped me grow into more of myself, authentically myself. In your 20s, I feel like you are discovering different parts of yourself that you've never discovered before. And I feel like that experience abroad has helped me grow into the person that I am today. And I'm so, so thankful. Any of my Toronto friends watching right now, I love you so much. You are the reason why I have enjoyed my life there and my experiences there. And so for that, I am truly, truly grateful. Now, ever since I have moved back, I have been reflecting on sort of my life in Japan and my outlook on life. I feel like being able to experience both countries, cultures. I feel like after living in a Western country and like living in an Eastern country where, Japan is a very homogenous, is that the right word? How Canada is very multicultural, Japan is like the complete opposite of that. So I can see the differences in the two countries and the two cultures. And ultimately, it's about like outweighing the pros and the cons of both countries and whether or not you want to live here or there. I think at the end of the day, growing up and maturing is realizing realizing that you have to make some sacrifices on certain aspects of living and like life, whether that be healthcare or food or transportation or weather, things like that. Like you really can't have it all, I feel like, in a country. And that's something that I really realized after living in Canada and living here. Obviously, moving back here, it definitely feels like I have to start over because a lot of my friends are abroad now. Majority of them studied abroad and they plan on living there post-grad, and that's sort of like how everyone is right now. I guess that's the one beautiful thing about going to an international school and seeing everyone live their own unique lives. But one really important thing about moving back is being able to be with my family. That's a really big reason as to why I moved back, to be honest. I know that I could have more for myself, or I feel like I could have more for myself living abroad, but in this moment right now, being with my family is something that I chose to do because can't buy back time. You never know when it's gonna be the last time you see someone. And I'm an only child, so a lot of that comes with, you know, my parents spoiling me and loving me to death. And because they've done so much for me to be able to even have the experience of studying abroad, I feel like the least I could do is spend a little time with them and be back. So yeah, I don't regret coming back home. I don't regret coming back home at all. I love being with my family, and I feel like if I had stayed in Toronto, maybe I would enjoy it, but the guilt would just eat me, I think. Like I always felt guilty for like even leaving Japan because it costs so much money, and it's like, I'm like, fuck, like should I even be doing this right now? But I knew that I needed to leave Japan because not only did I grow, but also I grew to appreciate Japan so much more. I like felt so confined and trapped being at home and like having a strict parent and whatnot. But being able to live abroad has definitely not only improved my relationship with my parents, but improved the relationship with myself, getting to know myself more. I feel like I'm repeating myself, but some of the little things that do bother me about living here is the working aspect. There's such a disparity between me and the typical Japanese person and sort of the customs and the cultures. I talked all about this in my working video and sort of like how I just really don't agree with a lot of the aspects of the working culture, but working comprises a big chunk of Japanese life. And I think like living here and going to the working aspect, it just makes me feel super like I've been feeling really down recently because I really see life in a third world perspective now, where it's like we really live in a capitalistic society where everyone is worked or overworked, for better use of word, till death. I can't imagine working a 9 to 5 every day for 40 plus years and call this life. Going back to what I said about you only have one life to live, like if this is only one life to live, why are we all living like this? Like you take the train in Japan, everyone seems so tired, like they're sleeping, they seem exhausted. No wonder Japan has like one of the highest suicide rates. I feel like mental health is not taken seriously. I feel like there's not a lot of resources that are promoted for people out here. Oh my god. Okay, I don't have enough storage and the sun is coming down, so I'm gonna try to wrap it up. But yeah, I'm the type of person that wants to like hug and like, you know, little things like saying bless you is not a thing in Japan either. Like little things like that really irk me, and I'm like still getting used to it. But that's just sort of like the reality of it, right? But other than that, I want to end off this video on talking about aspects of Japan that I love. I did talk about this in my first video about why moving back home, but I've been really loving the weather here. The sun is out. I experienced seasonal depression so hard in Canada, and the sun is out setting right now. It's not that cold. I love it. Being able to like have 100 yen convenience store food is amazing. And right now it's December. There's a lot of like illumination going on, so it's really pretty in the city. Being able to see like all the sights and stuff. I haven't been able to like really travel within Japan yet just because I have literally been working and that's all I've been doing since I've been back. Yeah, so far I have been really feeling really comfortable and stressed here and there, don't get me wrong, because of work. But other than that, like once you take the work aspect out of Japan, life becomes very peaceful here. So also I never really dealt with safety issues in Toronto, so I never felt like, I mean, Japan is very safe, yes. But I think it's very nice not going out of my house and seeing crack pipes everywhere. So that is a great thing. In terms of standard of living, Japan is amazing. But obviously the cultural aspects in terms of like customs, cultural rigidity, and identity struggles, I feel like in terms of my identity, I feel more in tune with, you know, living abroad. But that all comes with patience. I think eventually down the line in my life, I would want to move abroad again. But that is... Guys, moving countries is such a lengthy process. Moving all your stuff, furniture shopping, finding an apartment, like all of that, I don't really want to deal with right now. So right now my story is, yes, living in Japan, and that's sort of like how it is. And I'm taking it day by day. And I think patience is key. I think living in such a fast-paced city, especially like Tokyo, like you're so used to like moving and moving. I think it's really important to just sit down and sort of reflect, find out what you want for yourself, and slowly but consistently and surely move towards that. But yeah, that's sort of like my life, I guess. The complexities about being half and working in Japan and living abroad and studying abroad, like all is going to international school. Basically everything that I've talked about within my last couple of videos, all the topics that I talked about meshed into one, how I have a love and hate relationship with Japan. That's all I have to say right now. I talk way too much, so I shouldn't talk more. Probably yapped a lot, but thank you guys so much for, supporting me. Little comments here and there, like I appreciate you guys so much. My whole purpose on this channel is try to bring people together and, educate people, but like ultimately like connect people together and talk about things that people are too scared to talk about. It's just not talked about enough, period. So, but yeah, the sun is going down, so I have to end this video. If you guys watched it till this far, thank you guys so much for supporting me and watching this video. My phone has no storage, so I really have to end this video. I will see you in the next one. Bye!